Okay, we're looking at Galatians 5:17 to 18 today. Egar sarx epithumi katatu pneumatos, toda pneuma katate sarkos. Taftagar alelius antiquita, ina me aeon theleta, tafta pueta. For the flesh desires against or contrary to the spirit, but the Spirit supply desires contrary to the flesh. For these are set against one another, so that whatever you may be desiring, you may not do these things. Quickly running through the uses here. Epithumi I take to be a gnomic, as something that's always true. These things, the first topsa is the subject of antiquita. Antiquita as a present middle deponent is again gnomic by nature of virtue of the context. Alelius is a dative of reference. They are set with reference to one another. Theleta would be a progressive or iterative, most likely iterative since desires are not constant, though it could be progressive if you have a small enough window of time and view. Tavta, I'm making the direct object of pueta, not the direct object of theleta, and regarding it as referring anaphorically back to the relative pronoun aeon. So, in order that, or so that whatever you may be desiring, these things you may not be doing. And pueta as a present active subjunctive, again, progressive or iterative depending on what you do with theleta. Now, I'm at, as I've reviewed what I've said before on this passage, I'm at a third stage in my development. The first stage of my development was that I saw this verse saying that the flesh and the spirit are diametrically opposed to one another, and the result is a stalemate in the soul. The person who has both flesh and spirit can't do what they want to do. And that seemed to suggest that the flesh won. But I was unwilling to accept that because the previous verse and the following verse seemed to argue that the spirit can win. And so I just felt like I didn't know what to do with verse 17. Second stage in my development came after reading Ben Witherington's commentary on Galatians, socio-rhetorical commentary. And he suggested essentially that the same thing, yes, there's a stalemate between flesh and spirit, except that in this case, the spirit wins. You have fleshly desires, but the spirit wins, which seemed a better option than the first option. But recently, reading Gordon Fee's essay on the spirit-led life, he pointed out something that's in the text that's not theologically derived, and that cuts what I believe was this Gordian knot for me. And that is, he points out the word aeon here in verse 17, and notes that most English translations do not translate aeon at all. They just ignore it as though it's not there. Aeon is a particle of contingency in this case and introduces the everness that we use in English. So instead of this verse saying, in order that what you desire, these things you may not do, as though the things that you want you can't, the verse changes to, you can't do just any old thing you want, in order that whatever you may desire, you can't do just any of these. Instead, you have to walk in the Spirit. You have to be led by the Spirit. So that sets up a visual image of a person with an array of options in front of them, some of which are fleshly options, some of which are spiritual or spirit-led options. They can't just pick whichever one they want. They must pick the ones that are sourced in the Spirit. And this fits very neatly with what has just been said, verse 16. walk in the Spirit, imperative, and the result will be you will not fulfill the lusts of the flesh. And how does that happen? Well, you've got this array of options, and the Spirit will lead you not to fulfill the lusts of the flesh, but rather to fulfill His desires. And the consequence, verse 18, is that if, and let's pull that up, if you are being led by the Spirit, you are not under law. And under law, in Paul's usage here in Galatians, means to be under the law's condemnation. So, fleshly desires lead you to do things that are sinful, and as a result incur the law's condemnation. The Spirit leads believers to do things that are in harmony with the law, and thus they avoid the law's condemnation. Isn't this exactly what Paul says in Romans 8:1-4, when he says that there's now no condemnation to those who are in Christ Jesus, for those who walk not after the flesh but after the Spirit are fulfilling the righteous requirements of the law. That's why they're not under the law. So, with regard to the uses of verse 18, pneumati, I would take a dative of agency, being led by the Spirit. Augusta, present passive, probably a progressive, an ongoing relationship, though I suppose you might argue that it's iterative and that we experience the leadership on a kind of point-by-point or decision-by-decision basis. Either one is fine. Este is a progressive state of you are, that's your state of being. All right, and that's it for Galatians 5:17-18.